Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast brought to you by Black Belt Magazine. And this is episode 31, Film Study with yours truly, Jackson Rudolph. And I am extremely excited for this episode because we are going to be doing one of my absolute favorite things to do. This is like my number one pastime. I know that martial arts is a passion of mine and it's technically a job, although I love what I do. But when people ask me, like, what are my hobbies are watching sport karate and embracing sport karate history. That's exactly what we're going to do today. In the future, if you guys like this, you will be seeing more film study episodes. Typically, when I do these episodes before I was introduced to the Black Belt Magazine platform, I had done a couple of these episodes with other world champions, Sammy Smith, Reed Presley, and so I definitely want to expand the film study episodes to be including more guests in the future. But today, it's just me. We are coming at you live from the Century Martial Arts World Headquarters here in Oklahoma City, and I am extremely excited to get into it. We're going to be going all the way back to 1995 and then taking it all the way up to present day and exploring the evolution of sport karate and why sport karate looks the way that it does today. And who better to start with than the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Carmichael Simon. So this is the 1995 Battle of Atlanta that we are watching Kid Carmichael at right now. This is an iconic performance. Now, Carmichael is known as being the first competitor to ever land a 720 kick in competition. So a 720 kick is a jump, 2 spins in the air, followed by an outside crescent kick. I believe the 95 Battle of Atlanta was the first time that Carmichael ever completed this technique. I could be wrong about that. Carmichael, if you see this, go ahead, drop it down in the comments. Which one was the actual first 720? But I can guarantee that we are going to see a 720 thrown in this form, as that was one of Carmichael's many signature moves. A representative of Team Paul Mitchell, an absolute legend of the sport. I believe he's setting it up right here. Boom, there's the 720, executing the hook kick at the end of it, going right into the high-speed punching combination, sticking the 540. And then I love that lighting change there. I have to assume that this was a demo and not actually competition because of that spotlight that happened. If they did that spotlight in the middle of competition, that's crazy. I wasn't alive in 1995, so I'm not necessarily sure about how they were doing the lighting setups back then. That's another signature of his, that jump hook kick into the dive roll, right up into the pop front kick. Back to the spotlight, and then taking it slow, little change of pace there with the hand combination. And boom, nice solid finish with the ready stance of the June B from Carmichael Simon. Absolutely a legend of our sport and has inspired so many trickers in the current generation. One of the things that I think is really, really important about this film study is that if you are a competitor, if you're a coach that trains competitors, there is so much that can be learned by looking at sport karate history and going back and seeing why certain competitors won. What was it that helped them change the sport? What was it that helped them gain the appreciation of the judges? For Carmichael, you just saw it was him doing difficult techniques that others had not done before with the 720 kick and having excellent performance elements. You could see his facial expression was engaged the entire time. He had changes of pace in his form so that some parts were fast and some parts were slow. And that was kind of the beginning of what made, well, then it was called American forms, I believe, or open forms. And today it's called CMX, creative, musical, or extreme forms. But this is the beginning of that evolution that made CMX what it is today. Now we move on to another great competitor from that era. This is at the 1998 US Open, and this is Jon Valera, another representative of Team Paul Mitchell. And like I said, US Open 1998, and let's get into it. Now, I believe that Jon Valera actually ties with this form, and he runs a second routine, which is one of the reasons that I chose this video. So this will be an exciting one to watch for competitive purposes as well. Got a little bit of an interview here with JV. We're going to go ahead and fast forward past this a little bit because you can't hear what he's saying right now. And here we go. Showtime. See the ESPN2 banner in the back? That's old school. ESPN2 still broadcasts the US Open to this day. And once again, much like Carmichael in the beginning, we see a lot of suspense, a lot of drama building up this form, bringing the audience in, catching the judge's attention. This is something that Carmichael, Jon Valera, Mike Chat, they were all masters of this. You see that suspense still here, but it's all warranted. All of it is adding to the performance. It's not wasted time. It's not wasted energy. And he explodes right here into the form. Big, strong outside crescent kick there, setting up. Boom. I've heard that called the pit before, also known as a double leg. Very difficult technique, especially before 2000. Scissor kick. See those fast hand combinations. And one thing that we will notice as we watch the evolution as Jon Valera hits a clean 540 there is that the standards for stances and hand techniques will change. Right now, you see a little bit less of a focus on stances and more of a focus on the hand techniques, the speed, the extension of the chops and the punches, whereas the stances are all a little bit higher up. And then as the sport kind of evolves, we see a preference towards the lower stances as well. And it doesn't mean that any particular generation wasn't as clean as another generation. That's just how the standards changed over the years. And so we see 49.95 coming out here for Jon Valera. That's typically a winning score at the U.S. Open, but it looks like Richard Brandon, and Kim Do all tied in this particular division. So we've got a three-way tiebreaker. Jon Valera was the defending forms champion from 1997, and he is going to, I believe he freestyles it here to try to defend his title. We see a similar opening combo to what he did before. Switches it up with that 720, showing you that he believed that the 720 was an upgrade of the double leg. Setting up another big trick. Boom, threw in more kicks that time than the original scissor kick. The original scissor kick that he did in the first run of the form was only 3 kicks, the 2 extended kicks for the scissor, and then the round kick. I believe he did 4 or maybe 5 kicks in that combination. We'll have to look at the slow-mo afterwards. So you see what he's done is he's kept a very similar format to his original routine. He shortened it a bit, but most importantly, he did different techniques. He gave the judges a taste of something new. This is a really exciting element of competition. Let's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I believe that there was an extra little sidekick there at the end that made it 5. Could have just been 4. So you guys have to go back and rewind this episode and check out that slow-mo to really know for sure. 49.96, I believe that means that he had to have gotten at least a 10 or 2 for that performance. But anyway, the tiebreakers are an extremely entertaining part of sport karate performance that we really don't see very often anymore because of the way that the rules have evolved. There's a lot more different ways to do mathematical tiebreakers now than there were before. I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward us on to the next video here. So there's a lot more ways to do mathematical tiebreakers than what you used to see in the sport. And so you would get a lot of situations where these all-time great competitors from back in the 90s would have to rerun their forms against one another. They would often either improv or make up a new form on the spot in order to try to get that win. And that was a really exciting element of competition that isn't as prevalent in the sport today because of innovations with tie breaking. And there's 100 different rules from 100 different leagues about how you can break ties. So maybe we'll go into that in a future episode. If you go back to the Jax Rudolph podcast on YouTube, I believe it's the second episode that I ever did of this podcast. We talked about weird sport karate rules, and I believe that goes into some of the tiebreaker rules a little bit. So feel free to check out that episode if you're interested. For now, we're going to move on to another great competitor from that 90s era, the Blue Power Ranger, none other than Mike Chat, founder of XMA. Now, we're going to be switching over here. Mike Chat was an excellent forms competitor as well, but we are going to be switching over and showing you his kama forms so that we can cover some weapons competition as well. The majority of the first half of this show is going to take you through the innovation in forms competition, and then we will come back and loop around to talk about the evolution of weapons, and we'll kind of talk about the weapons individually one at a time. But for now, I wanted to give you a taste of this kind of triumvirate of competitors that was dominating the CMX, or back then what was called the American or the Open division back in the 90s, in the form of Carmichael Simon, Jon Valera, and this man right here, Mr. Mike Chat. So let's have a look at it. I'm going to move my screen sharing bar here. I don't know if that shows up for you guys or not, but I'm going to move it out of the way regardless. And this is another U.S. Open, 1996. This time the video is giving us some suspense. All right, here we go. So we see Mike Chat, yet another member of Team Paul Mitchell. A lot of the great competitors of the 90s, especially forms and weapons competitors, were Team Paul Mitchell members. There were also other great teams in the 80s and 90s, Trans World Oil, Metro All-Stars, just to name a few of them. But for these 3 competitors, they were all representatives of Team Paul Mitchell. And we will see, I know I'm a Paul Mitchell guy, so you guys are going to be like, oh, he's got Paul Mitchell bias. But we will be looking at some competitors today that were very significant to sport karate history that were not Team Paul Mitchell members. Then we see Mike Chat, for performance purposes, taking off the gi top. Showing some athleticism here, getting ready for that kama form. Those are some old school kamas. Boom. And then we see here again, the emphasis is on speed. And look at these fine-tuned manipulations, all these wrist and hand rolls that he's doing with the kamas. You don't see nearly as much of that today. You see a lot more finger spinning with the kamas now, a lot more releases. Look at the air he got on those double jump outside 360 crescent kicks. That was incredible. And then this was a Mike Chat signature, this multi-kick combo showing off the balance, the flexibility, the coordination. And I love, notice that skip front kicks with the ball of the foot. Nowadays, people always do the skip front kicks with the top of the foot, but I like seeing them placed with the ball of the foot, a little bit more traditional like that. So I always love the way that Mike Chat did that. And I also like these isolated manipulations. See how he would hit that pose and then just look back at that right hand and just manipulate the right hand for a second? That was really unique. That was something that was really innovative. So a very strong performance there from Mike Chat. Mike Chat known for a couple of other things as well. I believe he was the first competitor to ever do a backflip in a routine, which is a really cool part of sport karate history. And now we're going to go ahead, speaking of backflips, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to kind of the next generation of great sport karate competitors. So that was the 90s for you, which was kind of defined by Carmichael Simon, Jon Valera, Mike Chat, among others. There were other great competitors in the 90s too. We're primarily talking about hard style open forms competition for right now, in which case the standard was absolutely set by the likes of those three individuals that we just watched. And now we're going to move on to an era where, in large part because of those three individuals, we see a whole lot more competitors in these divisions trying a lot more difficult tricking techniques and really taking the sport to the next level. One of the first competitors to do this was none other than the great Steve Terada, who we're going to watch right now, a member of Quest Crew, which won America's Next Best Dance Crew. Forget what year that was, but already showing you some of the choreography there. He's hitting musical beats with every single one of those little motions in his introduction here. And I love the all-white uniform look for a creative form, or an extreme form in this case. Little Kamehameha wave there, some Dragon Ball Z inspiration, or maybe a Hadoken. And a signature Steve Terada side swipe there. That combination was beautiful. That was something that Steve was known for. A little bit more performance there. Again, all of this is choreographed to music, but because I'm commentating, you guys aren't hearing the music right now. Using that classic 90s setup for the tricking pass here. Split kick right into the full with the kick out, B-twist round, and then the huge raise going down into the split. We can already see a huge difference in terms of the combos that Steve is doing compared to what was seen in the 90s. So tricking, and there's the classic corner pass there with the multiple flash kick. So we're already seeing how tricking is starting to change the sport through Steve Terada here. A little bit more showmanship and creativity there with that hand combination, and then the always intense finish from the great Steve Terada. A lot of the videos that you'll see today are from sportmartialarts.com. I want to give a quick thank you to sportmartialarts.com for documenting so much of sport karate history. And then this video that we're going to watch now is from Black and Blue Video, which I believe is the karate video guy on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. If I am mistaken, feel free to go ahead and correct me down in the comments. But huge shout out to Black and Blue Video as well as sportmartialarts.com for documenting so much of the sport karate history for us to enjoy today. And so now moving on from Steve Terada, another member of Team Paul Mitchell. I promise we're going to get into some people that were not on Paul Mitchell here in a little bit. But now we move on to Daniel Sterling, who was yet another great member of Team Paul Mitchell. And this is also the Bluegrass Nationals, except this one's back in 2001. So we saw Steve in 2003. Now we're going to have a look at Daniel Sterling in 2001. I believe in the background there, you can actually see Greg Ruth, the promoter of the Battle of Atlanta. And you see the ever-intense Daniel Sterling starting full blast with the intensity right away, adding into some spins here to the beginning. That's going to be a common theme that you see. There's always this kind of suspenseful moment right before the form starts. Excellent extension on that hand combination, great power. We see the raise and the opening combo consistent with Steve Terada's form. And then the B-twist to the split there. So whereas Steve was doing raise split, Daniel Sterling was doing the B-twist to the split. That was kind of a unique, like, axe aerial Webster type variation there. That was interesting. And then flash kick to the corner. That's still something that's a mainstay in competition today. Largely innovated in the early 2000s with those corner passes. And then you thought he was going to be done there, but beautiful illusion kick to the split. Huge extension on that big outside crescent kick coming out of the B-twist-like setup for an illusion kick, and then the intense stare at the finish from Daniel Sterling. Another thing that I really like about these early 2000s competitors is the use of the wristbands. We saw the white wristbands with Steve. We saw the black wristbands here with Daniel Sterling. So that's just a really, really cool kind of part of the style. We see the great Ken Eubanks coming up, the promoter of the Bluegrass Nationals, and the award being presented. I believe... Is that T. Rondo Van Cleef? I believe that might be presenting the award. And there's Daniel Sterling winning his overall grand championship at the 2001 Bluegrass Nationals. Again, one of the historic sport karate tournaments. And now we're going to be interrupted by an ad here. Some type of a soap ad. Hopefully we can skip this pretty soon. All right, here we go. Skipping the soap ad. And now we are moving on to Bluegrass Nationals was killing it in the early 2000s. So many great routines. And now we're going to be moving on to Kim Do. He was a representative of Team Straight Up, known for his creativity and innovating so many different unique techniques within competitive martial arts. And so now let's enjoy this performance by Kim Do. Once again, another member of this early 2000s era. Huge X out, almost going into it with kind of like a double leg setup, which was really unique, but finishing it off with the X out to the knee. He's wearing the iconic purple gi top that Team Straight Up would always wear. I think in recent years they've shifted over to wearing black uniforms, but the white pants and the purple top, I mean, that was iconic. Beautiful side kick there from Kim Do. And now let's watch some of that style and creativity that he always brought. Now, much like Steve had choreography, Kim Do is now choreographing. Every single one of those punches was hitting a beat in his music, which is extremely innovative. He's got the breakdancing influence there with the coin drop. He's got the L kick and then into the gainer. Beautiful combination there. And notice how different that was from the other competitors that we've seen. Kim Do was really an innovator. There you have that Mike Chat style multiple kick combination. Very well executed. Looks into the camera there as he's going to the corner. Always a performer. You see the multiple flash kick there. And another thing is, and there's the raise to the split, or maybe it was a 540 split. He didn't invert as much there. So anyway, you see a lot of similarities of these competitors trying to say like, hey, you can do that. I can do it too. Steve Tirada had the multiple flash kicks to the corner of the 2003 Bluegrass. And then we see that Kim Do also had the multiple flash kick to the corner at the 2003 Bluegrass. So maybe a way of those two competitors showing a bit of gamesmanship and saying, hey, you can do that. I can do it better. Having a little bit of back and forth. And that's really the essence of competition, right? Is trying to prove that you can do the same techniques better than the other guy, or that you can be more creative and do even more difficult techniques than the other competitor. Now we're going to move forward into the next generation of forms competitors. Now, I know this is within the same decade. We're talking 2001, 2003 with Steve Tirada, Daniel Sterling, and Kim Do. And those competitors were still active around this time up through 2007. But Mark Canonizato and Matt Emig and some of these others that we're about to talk about competed into the 2010 decade, which is why I kind of consider them to be of a little bit different generation. There were several of them that were training partners. I know that Matt Emig and Daniel Sterling did team forms together at one point. So there is a lot of overlap here that I'm trying to show as best as I can, kind of a chronological progression of who was the standard in the sport at these particular times. So here's Mark Canonizato at the 2007 Diamond Nationals, another member of Team Straight Up. He would later in his career go on to represent Team Paul Mitchell. Once again, the iconic purple gi top, beautiful Webster there. Mark Canonizato was always known for how clean his Websters were. And you already see here in 2007, I mentioned in the 90s and early 2000s, there wasn't as much of a focus on stances. You see Mark Canonizato hitting beautiful stances from the beginning there. Huge hook kick. His legs were so long, made the extension of his techniques look so good. Beautiful extension on that chop punch there coming out of it. Little elbows in that hand combination there. Nice little switch direction. Beautiful flare split kick there. And now he's setting up that corner pass. And this is a Mark Canonizato signature with the Spider-Man X out, putting his hands between his legs like Spider-Man as he was doing that flip. That was something that Mark Canonizato was always known for. Pop, stick in that beautiful side kick, basic double knife hand strike, bringing in the traditional martial arts techniques, side swipe to the knife hand, and the big finish at the Diamond Nationals, one of the biggest stages in our sport. And Mark Canonizato put on a show like he always did. And now we're going to go ahead and follow up that performance with Matt Emig. Matt Emig and Mark Canonizato traded back and forth around this time period in the forms and weapons divisions. Matt with his chucks and obviously his extreme form skills. Mark Canonizato with the skills that you just saw in his kamas. And now we're seeing Matt in the iconic shampoo bottle uniform from Team Paul Mitchell. And he's going to run one of my favorite forms of all time. Anybody that's heard me talk about sport karate history before knows I love this form. We see beautiful stances here. Look at the flow on that tricking combination. Rodeo shuriken court coming out of it. He had the kick coming out of the end and grabbing the leg to make it a rodeo court. A little bit of showmanship here. Points up Brandy to the statue. That was a Matt Emig signature, was the statue flip there, grabbing the leg, coming out of it with an axe kick. And then we see just such a unique style and bringing in some influence from the 90s. We saw Carmichael with that jump hook kick to the forward roll to the pop front kick. Matt Emig bringing it back here in 2008, almost 10 years later. And then we see again another technique to the splits, and then a signature Matt Emig ending there, facing away from the judges with the key eye going up towards the sky. That was a Matt Emig signature. That's one of my favorite extreme forms of all time. And you see Matt still performs until the moment he leaves the ring. Check out the slow-mo. Full extension on the hook kick. Beautiful double right there. And then raise. Boom, there's the shuriken, grabs the leg, full rotation around right into the stance. And here's the brandy, which is a round off with no hands, grabbing the leg for the statue, coming out of it with style. And he was followed up by Scott Wu there. And so now that's going to kind of bring us up to Matt Emig has kind of been the standard of the past decade, even though he retired in 2012, I believe. Matt Emig's extreme form was the standard for what an extreme form should look like, at least in my opinion, from the perspective of the way that he hit stances, the way that he extended his hand combinations, the cleanliness of his tricking, the application of his tricking. When he was tricking, he was kicking and he was kicking hard. And that's one of the things that made his tricking so impressive. And now we're going to go ahead and use Matt as an example to go ahead and shift over to the evolution of weapons, because I believe, and I think that many people would agree with me, that Matt Emig is the greatest nunchuck competitor of all time. So we're kind of going to take this one weapon at a time. We're going to start by looking at the evolution of nunchucks a bit. Now, there have been great nunchuck competitors before 2000. There were obviously great martial artists like Lee Barden, who were kind of setting the stage for chuck competitors to be able to put together routines that looked more like extreme martial arts forms, or your stereotypical extreme martial arts form, and be successful in competition with chucks. One of the first people to be widely successful with chucks was a young Gemma Nguyen. She was a dominant junior competitor, tied the record for the most consecutive weapons U.S. Open titles with 4 consecutive ISKA World Championships in weapons. That is a record that is held, and there's not an official listing of this, but from what I've heard from other athletes over the years, I think that the only other 4 people to win 4 consecutive ISKA weapons titles like that, it's Gemma Nguyen, Casey Marks, who we're going to be getting to later, one of the founders of so many innovative bow staff techniques. Kalman Choka did it, and then I did it back when I was a junior as well. And so very, very dominant competitor here in Gemma Nguyen. This is her at the 2000 U.S. Capitol Classics. We see right out of the gate with the nunchuck manipulation. And Gemma Nguyen was very much known for her kicking, so you will see a lot of her kicking talent displayed here. You see that beautiful combo to start things off, hitting the stance with the punch there. And then holding that round kick nice and long. Boom, right into the split. That's a Gemma Nguyen signature. Into the kip up, which was kind of a new move coming on in the scene around the year 2000. New way of coming out of the splits. Backflip going straight into the pop front kick. And you got to remember, for 2000, even though by today's standards, a lot of these tricking techniques are more basic, for 2000 and for Gemma to have been a junior, this was extremely innovative for that time period. They were considered very high-level difficulty techniques. You see her back into the chucks manipulations and then right back into the signature kicking combinations. And then we get a nice cameo of a spectator walking through there. And then look at that round kick being held. Looks like she's giving a little bit of a smile and some showmanship there as well. Jump outside hook kick there. And then we see a young Matt Emig actually in the background now, which is really, really cool. Gemma sticking the 540. Matt's watching from the back. I believe that at this time, boys and girls still competed against each other as children. So Matt's probably in this division ready to go head-to-head with Gemma. So that's really cool. And then at the same time, so that was 2000 U.S. Capitol Classics. This is the 2000 U.S. Open. And this was John Su setting the standard in the adult division for what a great nunchuck form looked like. Obviously, if he's qualified to be on the U.S. Open stage, he won many overall grand championships with this form. He was also known for his wushu chain whip form, one of the few competitors that's ever been widely successful with hard style and soft style. You probably know John Su more for his traditional routines, including Unsu, which was probably his most famous performance with the one-legged front kick squat that he would do. If you don't know what I'm talking about, do some film study, go on YouTube, find that video. You see him manipulating the chucks. There's that lean back with the alternating figure eights that we see a lot of competitors replicate now in their routines, especially younger competitors. And then we've got 2 beautiful aerials back to back here. I love the all red uniform from John Su here. Very, very clean. Boom, little 540 to the split there. Kind of a unique way to set it up, too. That's extremely difficult, keeping the chuck spinning as he was doing the kip up. And then look at this, kicking combination as he was manipulating the chucks in different directions while he was doing the kicks. And that type of routine is kind of what laid the groundwork as we look at another ad here. That type of technique of using the chucks while you're doing different kicking techniques or the kip up, that laid the groundwork for a lot of the innovations that Matt Imig would show as he started to manipulate his chucks while he was doing more advanced tricking. So in a way, John Su in 2000 as the adult competitor competing on stage with nunchucks, and Matt Imig and Jimmy Nguyen as the juniors, Matt was able to kind of follow in those footsteps. But don't get me wrong, there were so many things that Matt innovated that were brand new about chucks that people hadn't seen before. So many finger rolls, thumb rolls, releases. The fact that he was doing the manipulation of the chucks while upside down and kicking, not just while he was kicking. Matt Imig truly took chucks to a whole nother level, and we will see him doing so here. Once again, that iconic shampoo bottle uniform that I love so much here in at the 2008 Quebec Open. And right there, right off the bat, I mean, that's in his introduction. He had double thumb rolls, hand rolls coming to the inside, more flair with the hand rolls right there as he's setting up this routine. I mean, Matt was changing the game even before his form started. You can tell he's going for it here, all the intensity, little inside thumb spin there. Beautiful trick, kind of a classic like Bruce Lee chucks pose with the chucks tucked up under the arms. 360 release with the chucks. I believe Matt Imig was the first person to do that in competition. And look at the speed, the power, the intensity, the precision. I mean, it was just on another level there. See a beautiful jackknife. And notice as he was doing that 540 kick, hit the chucks down in between his legs, right there, passing the chucks between the legs, coming out of that beach whisk. And so very early on in Matt's kind of reign on the NASCA circuit, you see him kind of adding in those elements of manipulating the chucks, manipulating the weapons while he was tricking, and that changed the game. Now we're going to move into another very popular weapon, which is the kamas. And now we're going to start to look at the evolution of kamas. Now, we already looked at what the standard of kamas in the 90s was by watching Mike chat. Jon Valera was competing with kamas as well. Jon Valera would also go on to coach Rudy Reynon, who's one of the kama competitors that we're going to be talking about here in just a second. But we cannot talk about kamas without talking about the greatest sport karate competitor of all time, who could win an overall grand in forms, weapons, and fighting whenever he wanted to, the great Kevin Thompson. And this is in 2006, but he was doing this since back in the 80s, 90s. And this is Kevin Thompson laying down a strong, powerful kama form. Like I said, I know this is 2006, but he was setting the standard for kama competitors long before then. And let's just watch the power, the intensity here. Always a performer, looking both ways before he starts his routine. Good, solid foundation, traditional basics. Wouldn't expect anything less from the GOAT. And look at this power. I mean, people don't use power like that in a kama form anymore. He's got the lower traditional grip on the kamas, so he can increase the power of his cuts. Most competitors are going to be holding their kamas in the middle, a little bit closer to the blade now, which is the competitive standard. That's fine. It's just kind of how kamas have changed over the years. You see a much more traditional grip here with Kevin Thompson. And you see that one-legged kicking combo, holding that reed chamber, powerful side kick. And then just so much intensity. I mean, he was going 120% every single time he was on the mat. Definitely finished off that guy with the that cut down to the ground there. And then, again, Kevin Thompson, I mean, there's nothing more that I can say. The greatest of all time, and you can tell why. I mean, his level of execution as a pure martial artist was just incredible. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to 2005, and we're going to see Ryan Redfoot. He was a representative of Kick Team, and a lot of people may not know who Ryan Redfoot is, but Ryan Redfoot was one of the first competitors to have success with the flying kamas. Flying kamas have always been kind of a novelty that you see come out in sport karate competition every once in a while, but it's rare that you see anybody have sustained success with the flying kama routine. And Ryan Redfoot was one of those people that was able to have that sustained success. And even though the flying kamas didn't necessarily contribute to the evolution of kamas as we see them today, because you rarely see it anymore today, I still think this is a really, really cool performance and something that we should appreciate. And so you'll notice that because he is using flying kamas, he's using the more traditional grip at the bottom of the weapon as well, because that's where the ropes of the flying kamas are tied around his hands. And you're going to see he's going to do very few kama cuts here. He goes right into the flying kama striking. And the speed there is incredible. Notice he wound that back up into his hand, and it was right in perfect position to cut, holding that split position there just high enough off the ground so that he could continue to manipulate the flying commas. Such a high-risk routine. I mean, it's so easy to hit yourself, cause cuts. I mean, the flying commas are an extremely difficult weapon to do well. I think one of the reasons that you don't see it in competition as much is that because the commas are tied to your hands, quite literally, there's relatively little drop risk. And so there's not the typical level of difficulty that you would get from doing releases that you would see if you were doing a regular comma form that wasn't flying commas. But as far as the difficulty of the actual striking itself, as you could see there, Ryan Redfoot displaying an extraordinarily high level of skill with those manipulations. And that's why I feel like that video was very important for everybody to see. And now we move on to somebody that I have always considered to be my favorite comma competitor of all time, a disciple of Jon Valera. This is Rudy Reynon, somebody who kind of set the standard for comma manipulations as far as spinning the commas through the fingers and just trying to find new ways to manipulate the commas. Rudy was somebody that was changing the game in that regard. And so let us enjoy the greatness of Rudy Reynon here. I'm going to go back to full screen. That was my bad. And as you can see, this is at the US Open. We got 2010. Man, ads are popping up for us on YouTube all day today. Here we go. And so again, we see here beautiful stance there in the beginning from Rudy Reynon. Now you will notice when Rudy starts his form, he is heavily focused on the upper body, huge, big, powerful 7 cuts there. That speed was unmatched. And you see a lot of the same style in terms of his comma striking, in terms of his cuts that we would see in a Jon Valera routine. And then again, you see this extremely fast finger spin manipulation. I mean, Rudy was really the first person to do that, putting his finger in the hole of the comma blade there. So not putting his finger under the blade where obviously it would be getting cut. If it was a live blade, the competitive blades have holes in them. So Rudy was actually using the hole in that blade to spin the comma there. That was very creative. And yeah, I mean, Rudy, in terms of just his finger spins and cutting alone, changed the game with commas. And then now, also at the US Open in 2010, we look at who was then a junior competitor, Austin Crane. And one thing, and I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a second to speak on this. I caught him in the middle of a technique there, so it looks like he didn't finish that punch, but he did. I promise you he did. One of the things that's really interesting if you study sport karate history is you can often see innovation coming, right? So we saw Rudy Reynon in 2010, and we saw the finger spins and the extremely high speeds and the clean execution of the cuts, but we didn't see any releases. Now we look into the junior division, which I believe Austin Crane was maybe 14 at this time. Don't quote me on that, I'm not certain. I believe he was 14 or 15 at this time. Could have been 13, not 100% sure. But anyway, we see Austin Crane in the junior divisions, and we're going to see Austin Crane already starting to add some releases into his comma form. And there were others in this generation that did as well. I just picked Austin because I always particularly enjoyed watching Austin Crane. Austin Crane was kind of that big competitor that when I moved up into the 14 to 17 division as I got older, he was the guy to beat. And so he's somebody that I always respected because he's who I was always training to compete against. But there were other competitors too around that time. A young Tyler Weaver was innovating as well. And then moving on in the adult division, you would have Mark Canizzato. And then moving on to today's times, you have competitors like Cole Presley that are innovating the comma releases. But here's Austin Crane, who was one of the original innovators of comma releases, as well as Michaela Johnson, who I actually studied in an earlier episode of Film Study. But today we're watching Austin Crane. We're seeing those beautiful 7 cuts once again. Reverse cut there, back to the finger spin, going right into the tricking with the touchdown raise cork. There's the release. See how quick that was? That release came out of nowhere. Fast, clean, executed well. Believe he's about to set up another one here. Yep, that's called an illusion release. And then that was really cool. The finger spin to that little horizontal release down low. I've never seen anybody else do that particular comma release. So that's a little bit of creativity being displayed there by Austin Crane. We got a little statue variation there, passing the commas in between the legs. Maybe a little bit of Matt Emig inspiration there. Back into those nice clean cuts. Finger spins again. That was a signature Austin Crane finger spin, that little over-under that he did at the end there. And then finishing strong. Lots of intensity at the end there at the 2010 US Open. And actually, I know he had to have been 14 or 15 at that time because I was on stage at US Open that year in the 13 under division, and I did not compete against Austin Crane. So Austin Crane had to have been 14 to 17. And now we're going to go ahead and switch over to the evolution of sword. And so we're going to be looking at Caitlin Deschelle first. Now, I know this says 2014, but one thing that I want everybody to understand is Caitlin Deschelle was winning women's weapons title, or well, girls weapons titles because she wasn't an adult yet, but she was winning her divisions with her sword form for the better part of 2 decades. I mean, I'm thinking all the way back to like 2005, Caitlin Deschelle was winning with her sword form. And the most impressive thing about it is that she was always true to her style. She never added in releases to her sword form. She was always fast, accurate, sharp, had her tricking techniques, and she was consistent, and that's what her career was predicated upon, was being consistent and having that extremely high level of excellence. So yes, this is 2014, but that's just because that was the most recent, the newest version of Caitlin before she was, a stunt woman for Wonder Woman, among other jobs that she's done working with Jackie Chan. She's done a whole lot for the sport karate industry in terms of working in stunts. And then now we're going to have a look at the Caitlin Deschelle sword form that made Caitlin Deschelle the winningest competitor in history. I don't know of anybody that has more overall grand championship wins than Caitlin Deschelle, which is just another testament to how great Caitlin was. And so here we go. Once again, we see that classic suspense at the beginning, spinning into the cartwheel Arabian to kick things off. That's a unique pass going to the back. Not many people do cartwheel Arabian to the back. So that was something that was unique to Caitlin. And that's one thing that I feel like sometimes in sport karate history, people take Caitlin Deschelle for granted because she was so good for so long. But there were really things that she innovated, like that Arabian to the back there. I've not seen anybody else do that. There was the Webster there going right back into the sword cuts. See a lot of creativity with the cutting here, changing it up. Lots of speed and intensity coming from Caitlin Deschelle. Boom, and then here we go, setting up. I believe this is going to be illusion kick. Yep, illusion kick to the pose there. Very well done. I believe this was a US Open winning effort, as many of Caitlin Deschelle's sword forms were. And again, you can see here, she picks her spots well. She's hitting poses very well, which is adding to her routine. Consistent, clean, nothing wrong with that performance. And that's part of what made Caitlin Deschelle as successful as she was her ability to be consistent and always perform at the highest level. And so there is Caitlin Deschelle. And now we're going to move on. And Joshua Corton was actually a training partner of Caitlin Deschelle's for a long time. But Josh had a very different style. Josh put a lot more focus. He was on Team Pro Rank. He put a lot more focus on the sword releases and trying to show a little bit higher level of difficulty as opposed to just focusing on consistency, which is something that was required of him competing against other great weapons competitors. We're going to watch Johnny Lascar coming up pretty soon. Corey Lutkus, the great bow competitor, was a huge challenge for Josh Corton. And Josh Corton was a huge challenge for Corey Lutkus as well. And so that kind of pushed both of those competitors to innovate releases with their respective weapons. And you'll see what I'm talking about here. This is Josh Corton at the Compete Nationals. Right there, already going into some spinning manipulations of the sword. There's the Arabian, so you can see maybe how Caitlin and Josh were training partners, both having the Arabian in their routines. That was unique there. He did that roll to the spine of the sword, so not the sharp bladed side, but on the back side, so that he wasn't injuring his hand. Now, this isn't a live blade, but obviously when you're performing, you want to try to simulate a live blade as much as possible, so that even when you are doing tricks, you can try to maintain some level of reality. There was the X out with the sword cut going between the legs. That's very creative. And then as you saw what, 3 or 4 different releases in that form. He had the behind the head catch earlier in the form too. And so Josh Corton was definitely an early innovator of a lot of these difficult sword routines. And now I believe the next video that we're going to move on to is Johnny Lascar, who was another great innovator. This is taking it back a few years. I believe that was Josh Corton in 2008. This is Johnny Lascar in 2006, a member of Kick Team, one of the famous teams from the early 2000s. Beautiful full twist there at the beginning. Very unique landing with the sheath on the ground and the sword cutting to the back. Lots of intensity from Johnny Lascar. Johnny Lascar and Josh Corton were known for their intensity. They would always go at it as hard as they could. I mean, you can see it here in Johnny's introduction with that suspense, bringing in that great intensity. And then now he's off to the races. Big clean sword cuts. That behind the back release right into the Webster. That was crazy for 2006. That's just not something that you saw in 2006. I mean, he was changing the game. I feel like a broken record saying that. You see another one of those inward rolls using the spine of the blade, not using the sharp side. Reverse cut there with kind of a tornado kick looking setup right into the aerial. And he was just going off. Speed, intensity, power, had that great difficult release in the beginning. So Josh Corton had a little bit greater release volume, but Johnny Lascar had a little bit more of a unique release with that behind the back going right down into the Webster. And their intensity, I mean, they were matching each other on intensity all the time. And now we move on to 2012 with Audrey Donahue. This was a U.S. Open Championship winning performance. And Audrey was obviously a student of Kalman Choka, who we're going to be watching here in just a second. And Audrey was probably the first female to really innovate sword releases. And that's what you're going to see in this routine here. Member of Team Paul Mitchell. And we see beautiful, clean, fully extended cuts from Audrey right off the bat. Some of the other competitors, as they would start to go faster, there would maybe be some lack of extension on the cuts. Audrey, however, she was always fully extending her cuts. You see beautiful stances there. Right into the aerial. And then once again, much like Caitlin, picking her spots well, kind of having those couple of really important key poses to add to the form. Little creative cutting combo there, right into the release, and then the inverted horizontal release there. Put the hands behind the head before the catch for some added showmanship. And there's Audrey Donahue laying it down. One of the greats in terms of innovating the sword and bringing in sword releases. Here we have another shampoo commercial coming up. And now we're going to go ahead and skip that. And here we are with Kalman Choka. This is Extreme Weapons, U.S. Open, 2009. This was the man that innovated the double sword. In many people's opinion, the greatest weapons competitor of all time because of his reign of dominance with his double sword form. Another member of Team Paul Mitchell. Like I said, he trained Audrey Donahue. And here we go. I mean, the greatness of Kalman Choka cannot be understated. The difficulty that he had in his double sword routines was second to none. And let's just enjoy this. Really creative manipulation there, pinching the other sword with just two of his fingers as he did the behind the head pass. Kalman was a master of that suspense too. If you watched his full intro, I mean, there was an aura that surrounded him when he was running a form. Beautiful double release there, very high level of difficulty, catching with the swords in reverse grip, going into the full twist. Now he's putting those two swords together, almost did a little bit of a bow staff combination there. That was something that Kalman was known for. That was always a staple of his double sword routines. And that little tornado with the double strikes going out down to the ground, the stab to the ground, that was another Kalman Choka staple. Just so many signature moves that he had on top of these crazy releases that he would do, throwing one sword off of the other one there, and then always clean. Very rarely ever saw Kalman make mistakes, very rarely ever saw him drop. And then there he is with that signature muscle pose at the end of the routine, showing off that intensity. And man, I mean, that's vintage Kalman Choka. I could watch Kalman Choka videos for hours, but we don't have hours for the show. So we're going to go ahead and move on. And once again, Kalman just kind of shows you and kind of rounds out the innovation that we've seen in the sword routines. So we've done nunchucks. We've done kamas, we've done sword, and now we are going to do the most commonly used competition weapon of all time, my favorite weapon, my weapon of choice, the bow staff. And we're going to start by actually talking about the lineage that I come from, which dates all the way back to the 80s and 90s with the great Mike Bernardo, the father of modern bow. This was the guy that innovated actually spinning the bow in your routines. If you see somebody do the tuck under the arm, spin around, swing to a forward strike, one-handed spinning figure eights, Mike Bernardo was a huge part of the innovation of those techniques. And then we're going to have a look at it right now. This is the 1994 U.S. Open. I love the Hakama there. As the kids would say, he's got that drip. I can't believe I just said that. That's okay. I'm trying to be hip, guys. Trust me. So here we go. Here's Mike Bernardo. The long hairstyle was a classic bow staff look of the 90s. A lot of the great bow staff competitors had that look. Adds to the intensity. And I think in reality, they were all just copying Mike Bernardo because, I mean, it was just so iconic. The long hair, the Hakama, the extension of the techniques here, the intensity. And again, different standards of striking from what we see today. Like right there, you see the thrust with the bow over the top of the forearm. Now the competitive standard is to tuck the bow under the arm on the thrust. So as the years go on, things change and things evolve, but that absolutely doesn't take anything away from this type of performance, which was truly influential in the evolution of bow staff. And again, right there, a lot of these great competitors having these unique poses, these opportunities for these pictures to get taken that just stick in the judges' minds and help the audience remember them forever. There's that one-handed figure eight spinning manipulation there, flicking the hair back on the uppercut. That was iconic. And then the classic finishing pose there, one hand on the knee, bow down to the side. That was a classic. You could see him shaking with intensity there at the end of the form. And that pose of being on the knee with one hand on the knee and the other hand striking down with the bow, that would become kind of a staple of the Mike Bernardo lineage. It's something that Casey Marks did at the ends of her forms. And speaking of Casey Marks, we're going to watch Casey Marks-Nash right now. This is at the 1995 U.S. Open. I believe she was a junior at the time. And then this is just 1 year after watching that performance from Mike Bernardo. Casey was a student of Mike Bernardo. Like I said, did that classic pose at the end of a lot of her forms. Lauren Carney, a disciple of Casey, did the same at the end of her traditional weapons forms at times. And then at the end of my traditional weapons form, I do the same thing as I am a student of Lauren. So a legacy of almost 30 years, 40 years being continued is something really special to be a part of. And now we're going to have a look at the great Casey Marks, arguably one of the greatest female competitors of all time, but I'm biased because I'm a huge Casey Marks fan. Yes, this is youth weapons, so she was a junior at the time. Really cool look with the Hakama there, the red down one pant leg and then the black on the other side. Using that suspense, just like all these competitors have, looking both ways before she starts. Figure eight spin to begin it, deep front stance on the forward strike. Look at the extension, beautiful execution there. And then just the power that went into these strikes. I mean, that was something that no other female had done before in terms of bow staff. The level of power and precision that Casey put into her striking was second to none. You see that classic spinning, swinging combo there that was started by Mike Bernardo. No doubt in my mind that Bernardo had some significant influence on Casey in putting that type of combination in her form. And then another one of those unique poses right there. And then one of the things that changed the game for bow staff is coming up here a little bit later on in this routine. We see that beautiful low stance there. She's setting it up. I think here it comes. Striking combination to the back. There's the over the head strike down low. Bringing in some more suspense. Here we go. Figure eight spin. That's a double-double. Hand roll into the release. That was a game changer. I believe 1995 U.S. Open, this form was the first time that a competitor ever did a release in a bow form. There's another little release onto the back of the hands, then coming over the top. And that single release is what set the stage. And again, you see that classic pose on the knee. That single release is what set the stage for competitors like myself to continue to innovate releases over the course of the next 20 or 30 years. And that's what we're going to continue to watch. And don't get me wrong, I'm not the only person that did releases. There were many, many, many people that did releases before me. I'm just saying that it had a significant influence on me when I started to combo releases, and that kind of became the innovation that I contributed to bow staff. And so now we're going to take a look at my original bow staff instructor, Lauren Carney. This is at the U.S. Open 2006, I believe. Like I said, Lauren was a student of Casey Marks. And Lauren was a master of intensity as well. I mean, I sound like a broken record, but really any of these all-time great competitors, they're all masters of intensity, showmanship, performance, whatever you want to call it. I mean, all of these competitors, that's what you need to be great. That's what you need for the judges to remember you. We're going to see a lot of similarities in terms of the striking preferences for Casey and Lauren, a lot of little creative manipulations. You saw Lauren leave the bow on her shoulder there as she came through. I believe Lauren's going to set up a release of her own. Not quite there yet. She faked us out a little bit. There's the release right into the swing combo. So now taking two of Casey's innovations, the swinging, spinning combination and the release, Lauren was doing that in one combo. More creative striking there, threading the bow through her arm for a little stab there. That was a signature Lauren Carney pose at the end there to have that knife hand going up the other way off the strike. And then I believe that was Kalmanchoka that we were about to watch coming up there next. And now, concurrently, so Lauren and that part of the lineage ultimately led to myself. And if you've ever seen any videos of me, you kind of know what I've done with my bow staff routines. But concurrently, there was another lineage being developed. Now, this is a video from 2011 toward the end of Nate Andrade's career. But Nate Andrade was somebody, Nate Showtime Andrade. If you were ever around tournaments in the 2000s and you heard, "It's showtime," right before form, that was Nate Andrade yelling that out right before he busted out with a bow form. And Nate would go on to coach Ross Levine. And Ross Levine actually had a lot of success with his bow form, winning diamond rings, Warrior Cups, US Open titles, you name it. In an era that was very, very deep with weapons competitors. I mean, Ross Levine was winning with bow forms in the time in which Kalman and Matt were winning with double sword and their chuck forms as well. And so for Ross to be successful then, it's a testament to Ross's work ethic and how great of a competitor Ross was, but also a testament to the coaching of the great Nate Andrade, who innovated so many bow tricks, especially body rolls. I mean, this dude is like a walking dictionary of bow staff tricks, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. 2011 Battle of Atlanta, like I said, this is towards the end of his career. And there's also just something satisfying about watching somebody who is 6'8" doing a bow form. I mean, you may not be able to tell in this video, but Nate Andrade was a giant. I mean, he was watching him do bow. I mean, if he did a swing, everybody in the next 3 rings around him had to back up because everybody was terrified of that 7-foot-long bow coming at you. And so you already see some differences in the striking preferences. We see a little bit more of a carry through and a more overextended strike with Nate. That was a stylistic preference. I love the little sauce there with that little low kick turning through into the bow striking combo. That was a Nate Andrade signature. He often used it on some of his transitions as well, little backhand swings, things like that. There's one of those transitions right there, little neck roll transition into the shoulder neck, also known as a sunset, taking that into an arm roll. That was very innovative. There's a little roll there called a straight jacket, and then the Voodoo Child. These are all moves that Nate made up himself. Voodoo Child is still a staple move in bow staff competition. Right into that palm spin, you see Nate crack the smile because he hit a great routine. And then, Nate, what else can you say? Nate was one of the greatest innovators of bow staff tricking techniques to ever live, and that's something that I will always give Nate credit for because he was a big inspiration for me coming up as a young bow competitor. And so now, speaking of Ross Levine, a disciple of Nate Andrade, we're now going to take a look at Ross Levine's routine. This is when he was representing Team Full Circle from the Quebec Open. And right off the bat here, you're going to see a lot of similarities in the styles between Nate and Ross. Again, that similar kind of carry-through striking style that was classic for both of those competitors. Makes sense because Ross was Nate's student. We see the palm spin right there with the lean back. Notice that was left-handed. I don't think Ross is left-handed, but he was just doing a left-handed palm spin there. I never noticed that before. That's really interesting. Double-double there. Right into what's called a reload. That was another technique that Nate innovated and obviously passed on down to Ross. That was an awesome technique there. Still a staple in competition today. Vertical spinning behind the back pass into the big, strong uppercut there. Double-double to the finish. Lots of intensity. Most people know Ross Levine as a fighter. You may know him now as a Glory kickboxer. I think he had the knockout of the year for Glory last year in kickboxing with a head kick that I think got somebody through the guard, knocked the guy out. So a lot of people know Ross Levine for his fighting prowess, but he needs to be appreciated for his success as a weapons competitor as well. And this brings us to the last video for this episode, which is going to be kind of the last member of that generation before my generation, right? And I didn't really want to get into current competitors right now. I figured that I would save that for another film study because there are so many great competitors right now to highlight and put on a pedestal. And I also don't want to talk about my own forms, so I'm not going to do that. But anyway, now we're going to go ahead and take a look at kind of this last step in the evolution of bow right before I started comboing bow staff tricks. And so you'll see here, Corey's using a combination of releases and body rolls. You saw Nate and Ross using a lot of body rolls. You saw Lauren and Casey innovating the release in their forms. And now with Corey in 2009 through about 2011 or 12, you see Corey start to be kind of the culmination of those two styles, right? I'm not sure who originally trained Corey Lutkus, but you will see the roles of the Andre lineage and you will see the releases of the Casey Marks lineage, both in this same routine. And he was the first person to kind of balance out having the roles and having the releases. He originally represented Team Straight Up. In this performance, he's representing the American World Competition Team, which would later go on to become Top 10 USA through a variety of different transactions. But anyway, this is Corey Lutkus, and just watch, because Corey Lutkus is what kind of inspired me to push the boundaries of bow staff releases, to start comboing releases together like others hadn't done before. My biggest inspiration to do that was Corey Lutkus. And so now we're going to take a look at Corey's form. Again, this is 2009 US Open. Again, this was a championship winning routine. Most every routine that we've watched today has been a championship winning routine. And then once again, we see a unique setup here. Back of the hand, similar to the end of Casey's form. So a little bit of Casey influence there, right into the corks. So already bringing in some of that late 2000s era tricking that you see in Corey's form. You see kind of the skull bash or the blocking strike there into his signature Leviosa. That's a throw going above his head off the back of his hand with a 360 catch. So there's the release coming into play. You see similar striking habits to that of Ross and Nate. So very similar striking. There's the roll. So you saw Ross do the reload. That's a variation of the reload that Corey just did called the circus. And then now a roll right into a release there, right? So we see the roll, the release going back the other way, another release, and then right back into the rolls. So he's alternating rolls, releases. And that is something that was very influential to the current state of bow staff. And then obviously raising his fist in the air. As many of you know, that's something that I like to do at the end of my routine as well, for two reasons. Part of it is a little homage to Corey Lutkus, because that's something he always did at the end of his routines. And another part of it is because of my personal religious beliefs and giving all the glory to God at the end of my routines. But anyway, so Corey Lutkus, very influential to what we now call modern bow staff, 10 years after this form ever happened. And so I hope that what everybody can take away from this episode today is a sense of how, from the 90s all the way through now, the year 2020, how sport karate has grown and developed, and the changes that we've seen in open forms competition and in weapons competition across all four of the major weapons. Now, this isn't to say that there weren't other great innovators. There were a ton of great soft style competitors that we didn't even talk about today, from Ho Sung and Ho Young Pak to Richard Brandon to DX to Austin Jorgensen. I mean, there's been so many great soft style competitors that weren't covered in this episode because we were focused on the evolution of hard style open forms competition. There have been great influential traditional forms competitors. There's been John Su, but we didn't see John Su's traditional form. Kevin Thompson laid down excellent traditional forms. Scott Wu and Will Cornell ushered in an era of performance-based traditional forms. So there have been so many great influencers over the course of sport karate history, and that's why there will certainly be more film study episodes like this in the future. Drop those comments below. I'm planning on doing a film study with a guest every 3 or 4 episodes. So about once a month, you'll be seeing a film study episode like this. If you have a form that you want me to watch, or if you have a guest that you want to suggest, go ahead and drop that down in the comments below. I am so incredibly appreciative for all of your support. This has been episode 31 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, brought to you by Black Belt Magazine, and I'll see you next time.